outcome. Kennedy, appointed by Ronald Reagan in 1988, has long been a crucial swing vote in the sharply divided court, and his departure at age 81 gives President Trump an opportunity to name his second Supreme Court justice in just 17 months. An opportunity here to shift the court decisively to the right. NBC's Justice correspondent Pete Williams is in Washington with more on the enormous potential impact of Justice Kennedy's decision. I want to bring you in now. Pete, give us the backstory here. I mentioned he's 81 years old. This has been rumored maybe to be happening. Why now? Why has the justice decided to retire now?
Strike the word potential in terms of what kind of a change this is going to be. This will be the biggest change in the Supreme Court in at least half a century. Because ever since Sandra Day O'Connor retired from the Supreme Court 12 years ago, Anthony Kennedy has been the decider. In many ways, this has been the Kennedy court. When he votes with the four conservatives, we get decisions gutting the Voting Rights Act, giving new life to the Second Amendment, allowing more union and corporate money in politics. And we saw it just yesterday when he was the fifth vote in a decision upholding the president's travel ban. When he voted with the court's liberals, the courts narrowed the reach of the death penalty. It gave legal rights to detainees in Guantanamo Bay. It said states couldn't enforce their own immigration laws. And perhaps most decisively, Justice Anthony Kennedy has written a series of rulings on pro-gay rights, including the landmark 2015 decision declaring a right to marriage for same-sex couples nationwide. We learned about this just moments ago when the Supreme Court handed us a letter that Justice Kennedy sent today to the White House, simply saying this letter is a respectful and formal notification of my decision effective July 31st of this year to end my regular active status as Associate Justice of the Supreme Court. And it's signed respectfully and sincerely, Anthony Kennedy, Anthony M. Kennedy. Now, a couple of things about this letter. First of all, the fact that he says he's going to retire effective July 31st, when justices usually retire, at least this has been the recent practice, they say that their retirement will be effective upon the nomination and confirmation of a successor. So what this means is we'll be down to 8 justices on the court as of July 31st, and if the President and the Senate don't get their act together and confirm someone, by the first Monday in October, we'll be starting out this term with just 8 justices again, just as we did after the death of Antonin Scalia. Now, this is going to set off a huge political fight in the Senate because Democrats are still smarting over the decision by the Republicans in the last year of President Obama's term, not even to give a hearing to President Obama's nominee to replace Justice Scalia, Merrick Garland. So even though the Republicans have the majority, it's still going to be a tough fight for whomever the president nominates. But you can be sure that whoever President Trump nominates will be more conservative than Anthony Kennedy. And that will shift this sometimes conservative, sometimes liberal court to one that's solidly conservative. It will give the Chief Justice, Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, and Neil Gorsuch a 5th solid conservative. And that legacy will last for years and years to come. The only thing that could potentially change it is if another liberal decides to step down, but who knows what that is. So it's just impossible to overstate how big a deal this is for the future of the Supreme Court, at least for the next decade or so.
Pete Williams, as you said, he's a centrist. He's been this swing vote for many years now. He was born in Sacramento, went to Stanford University, then on to Harvard Law School. Talk a bit, if you would, about how his brand of jurisprudence was forged. How did Anthony Kennedy become Justice Anthony Kennedy?
Well, he was put on the court by Ronald Reagan, who liked his conservative credentials, and he joined the conservatives, but then immediately, shortly after he came onto the court, broke with the conservatives and voted to uphold the Roe v. Wade and the follow-on decisions declaring a fundamental right to abortion. So one big question here is, will Justice Kennedy's departure and will his replacement by a more conservative justice mean that the Roe v. Wade decision could be changed? It's easy to see how it might be because there'll be 5 solid conservatives, but only Justice Clarence Thomas, in addition to Kennedy, is among the conservatives who've ever voted on the fundamental question. So we don't really know where the Chief Justice, Samuel Alito, and Neil Gorsuch stand. We can guess, but we don't know how they stand on the fundamental question of Roe v. Wade. And you know, conservatives on the one hand tend not to support abortion rights, but on the other hand, they tend to believe that rulings for the Supreme Court that have been long in force, what lawyers call stare decisis, should be respected. So it certainly puts the fundamental right of Roe v. Wade potentially in play. It's a big deal. Justice Kennedy has generally voted for to uphold the fundamental core holding of Roe, but on the other hand, he's a justice who wrote the opinion striking down what are called partial birth abortion laws. So he's, because perhaps of his deep Catholic faith and his conservatism, he's never been a big advocate of abortion, but on the other hand, he's been a solid vote for Roe v. Wade.
Reporting here on Justice Anthony Kennedy announcing his retirement effective July the 31st of this year. I want to turn now to our White House correspondent, Kristen Welker, to get a sense here of what the White House has said about this thus far. Pete Williams there just a moment to go, Kristen, talking about the political fight this is surely going to lead to in the coming months.
President Trump just weighing in. He's in the middle of meeting with the Portuguese president. Here's what he said, David. He said, he's a man I have great respect for. He's a man I've known for a long time. He's a great justice of the Supreme Court, someone who has great vision. He's also tremendous. So President Trump really praising Justice Kennedy. He said he will pick someone who will be outstanding to replace him. He also thanked him for his years of service. He was asked when he will pick this replacement and who it will be. The president said there are numerous people, a list of 25 highly educated, highly intelligent people, and it will be somebody from that list. Now, President Trump has been thinking about this, of course, because there has been a lot of speculation about whether or not Justice Kennedy would in fact retire. And now, of course, the fact that it has happened, this allows President Trump to put a significant stamp on the Supreme Court. He picked Neil Gorsuch, of course. He is expected to pick someone who is young, someone who shares his conservative principles, and that could have big implications for a range of different, very thorny topics, everything from abortion rights to religious liberties, those fights surrounding some of those topics. Now, this comes against the backdrop of a week where President Trump has had a significant victory in the Supreme Court, the court ruling to uphold his travel ban, one of his most controversial policy issues. And of course, the president continues to be mired in a fierce fight over the border, over his zero tolerance policy. So this is a significant day for President Trump as he now thinks about who he will pick to replace Justice Kennedy. David.
Kristen Welker there, our White House correspondent. Just to recap what we've learned here, Justice Anthony Kennedy, age 81, has decided to retire from the Supreme Court on this, the last day of the Supreme Court's term. His resignation will be effective the 31st of July. We're going to have much more throughout the day on MSNBC and NBCNews.com, and a full wrap-up tonight on NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt. I'm David Gura, NBC News, New York.
So that
It sounds like we've lost. We were having trouble with the phone lines here today. We'll work on that. Hopefully we can get Jonathan Turley back. As we scramble to do that, I believe we have Mike Murphy now, Republican strategist, joining us. He was an advisor to George W. Bush, Mitt Romney, John McCain, among others. And Mike, curious about the politics on this, because let me put the interpretation I think we're going to be hearing a lot past you, see what you think of it. And that is that this year, in this midterm election year, there's been an enthusiasm gap where we've seen Democrats mobilize to the hilt. Election day is circled. They can't wait to get out there and vote. From the Republican side, there's been more of a question mark there. But if you throw into the middle of this a Robert Bork-like Supreme Court fight into the middle of the summer, maybe into the fall, that there it is. That's the thing that could motivate Republican voters equal to where Democrats are. Do you think there's anything to that?
Well, I think there's something to it. It's already a red-hot election, and I think President Trump has done a pretty good job of getting more casual Democratic voters who tend to only vote in presidential years to do what they normally don't do, which is engage in an off year. We've seen that in the special election. So the question is, what will this mean? My guess is it'll heat up everybody. Republicans and conservatives will get extra excited. Democrats and liberals will get extra excited. I think the abortion issue, because this was the swing vote, so Roe v. Wade politics pop up. That'll help the Republicans in some Senate states. It'll hurt them in others. So this ramps the whole intensity of the election up. I'm not sure, because the new voting numbers, as your previous guest said, are different than they were in the Bork era. This could go quicker, which, you know, may or may not be what each party wants. My guess is the Democrats really want the issue of the Supreme Court at stake. And the last thing is the wild card of President Trump. He operates more on personality than ideology. Who knows who he might nominate? There's a smart way to go politically where you pick somebody who's already been vetted, as I think was remarked before. But, you know, Donald Trump is always the the wild card when making these decisions. So that's a hard one to know what's going to happen. But the stakes are much higher now. That'll add heat to the election in every way.
And I think we have Pete Williams picking up with us again here. And Pete, just to continue on a point Mike Murphy was raising there, Mike says, you know, basically with control of the Senate, theoretically, Republicans could have the ability to move very quickly on this. Control of the Senate, no filibuster anymore. They could get this through more quickly, even with a controversial pick. Although, again, 51 Republican senators, as Garrett mentioned earlier, John McCain has been sidelined for a while now. You know, is there a possibility? Is there any risk here of do we not have Pete Williams? Am I asking a question do we have Pete Williams with us, folks? We don't have Pete Williams, so I'm going to rephrase this question to Danny Savalas, who's right here with me in the studio. And Danny, you may know where I was starting to go with that, but it's basically this. If Republicans don't have much of a margin for error in the Senate on this, 51 votes with McCain, 50 if he remains sidelined. If it's that, they have a margin for error of 1 on this. Is there a risk here of this administration overreaching? If Roe versus Wade is an issue, a Republican like, I don't know, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, is there a Republican out there who you think of John McCain in that thumbs down moment with health care about a year ago? Is there a Republican who could draw a line here and say, no, that's too much. Let's go with a more moderate nominee?
There's a huge risk for exactly the reasons you stated. That's why this is a different process than it was with Gorsuch. You could make the argument that Gorsuch was a return to the status quo. He was similar enough to Scalia, and while Democrats were not happy about the Merrick Garland situation, at least once Scalia passed, the idea was that he was essentially being replaced. You will not be restoring the court to a status quo with this next pick at all. That's why it will be a more controversial choice.
Yeah, and Mike Murphy, just before we let you go, I want to get you on that possibility too. Do you know this Republican Party well? You know the divide in this Republican Party, especially with sort of the establishment folks, for lack of a better term, in Washington. Could you see some resistance there from a Susan Collins, from a McCain, from somebody to a Trump pick here?
Well, I think Republicans generally, and I think this would reflect most of the Senate members, look for a conservative judge with a pragmatic streak. Roe v. Wade being a good case study of pragmatic legal interpretation. So I would be surprised if they buck, unless the president nominates somebody who is outside what they think the mainstream conservative thought is on the court. In a rational world, I would bet on one of the judges who were recently already confirmed by the Senate. That's the smart political way to go. But with Donald Trump, it's always a wild card. And if he really, you know, if Judge Judy pops up or something, then people could buck. We could be into a whole new world. It's just hard to predict with him. But the standard play would be to get somebody who is more center-right and do it quick and get it done.
All right, Pete, excuse me, Mike Murphy, thanks for joining us. Danny, quickly, you have something to say there?
Thank you.
Yeah, this is not going to be a typical Trump decision by fiat. The history has shown that he really defers to advice when it comes to appointing federal judges. And particularly, it looks like he's taking advice from places like the Federalist Society. And at least in this realm, he doesn't appear to be sort of willy-nilly making choices. This is something he chooses to delegate. And while he ultimately makes the choice, he likes others informing him on this one.
And I think we have Pete Williams back with us. Pete, I'll start asking the question, and I hope you can hear me. Danny Savalas was just saying the issue of court appointments, Supreme Court appointments, a bit of an exception to our understanding of this administration in terms of how orderly it is, how much they hew to a traditional process. I am thinking back, you know, it was about a decade ago, a little bit more, we did see a Republican revolt against a Republican Supreme Court nominee, Harriet Miers, with George W. Bush. When you look at the different names that are out there being bandied about for this opening. Are there any names that you see in circulation that could prompt some kind of a backlash from Republicans?
Well, any name is going to prompt some backlash, certainly from liberals and Democrats. None of the names that come immediately to mind, I think, would be viewed by Republicans as so far out of the conservative mainstream that they couldn't support them. In fact, that's one of the things that the Federalist Society and the other groups advising the president have had in mind. It's from that list, you may recall, that Neil Gorsuch was chosen. And Leonard Leo, the president of the Federalist Society, has already said just a few minutes ago that any nominee that is chosen by the president, he thinks would be someone like Neil Gorsuch. But Tom Goldstein's here with me, our Supreme Court expert. And you say you think the opposition is not going to waste any time in mobilizing?
No, I think that the groups on both sides of the political divide just geared up. They all had their press releases.
They were ready, right?
They are ready to start making phone calls. They have the midterm elections in mind. I think the administration has to be ecstatic about this. They have avowedly kind of delegated this question to conservative judicial organizations. And so you're going to see Republicans really rally around the president. It's probably a good distraction for him from other issues, probably. And I think that list is gold to conservatives. Almost anybody on it is really going to check every box and going to create a lot of excitement on the right and a lot of fear on the left about things like abortion, about a real expansion of the relationship between church and state, gun rights, things that really, really motivate people and really motivate voters are all on the table now.
And one other thing here about why Justice Kennedy chose to retire now. You may recall that we went through all of this a year ago when Justice Kennedy had told friends that he was thinking about retiring and that he basically thought 30 years was a pretty good amount of service in public service and on the court, and that he wanted to, spend more time with his grandchildren and so forth. And he says in his letter that he looks forward to staying in close touch with the court, but clearly it's something that he wants to do to spend more time. He says in a statement here that while his family was willing for him to continue to serve, his decision to step aside was based on his deep desire to spend more time with them. And I think the other thing is, though, we talk a lot about Justice Kennedy being a moderate. Justice Kennedy is a conservative, and we forget about that. He's a conservative who was comfortable with this president. He's had a good relationship with some members of the Trump family. Shortly after the president came into office, some of the Trump family came up here to see the court and spend some time with him. So he was ready to go and comfortable to go now.
Pete Williams down there outside the Supreme Court, I am sure will be checking back with you. Thank you for that. Join now and bring into the coverage Chris Matthews, our own MSNBC's Chris Matthews. Right. And Chris, we had a Supreme Court fight last year over Neil Gorsuch and really in the 2016 campaign as well over Merrick Garland. The filibuster's gone now, and yet politically this seems like it's going to be a more intense fight we're in store for here.
Well, I don't think the Democrats should allow even meetings to occur with Trump's nominee to fill this vacancy by Justice Kennedy. I think they have to fight eye for an eye for what happened in 2016, where the Republicans led by Mitch McConnell refused to even consider or even meet with Merrick Garland. I think if the Democratic leadership under Schumer allows this to go forward, they're going to have a huge problem with the Democratic base. We saw Joe Crowley get beaten up in New York, up in Queens yesterday. You can tell that this leadership will be tottering on edge if they allow this to proceed. There's no way politically the Democratic base will stand for any kind of hearings or vote on a Trump nominee for the Supreme Court before the election. We've got an election in 4.5 months. There's no reason to consider a replacement on the Supreme Court in that time. No reason given the history of what happened. Let's watch McConnell now. I'm telling you, they have no right to bring this up after what they did in 2016.
I guess the practical question is, if that's the approach Democrats want to take, how do they do it? Because they tried to filibuster the they tried to filibuster the Gorsuch nomination. Republicans just did away with the filibuster. Republicans have 51 votes right now, 50 if McCain is sidelined. Still enough with Pence sitting there. If Republicans stay together, is there anything Democrats can do?
Well, there's a lot of dilatory tactics they can use on every other bill before the Congress between now and November. If they don't use everything they've got, if they don't don't play hardball, I think they're through. I know the Democratic base. They are very angry about this leadership. They feel it has not fought hard enough against Trump. And if they allow Trump to fill the Supreme Court with another conservative who will not share Justice Anthony Kennedy's views on social issues like marriage equality. I mean, Judge Kennedy deserves a lot of credit from the gay community and I think all Americans for marriage equality and for the liberty, the Lawrence case before that, his belief in the Liberty Clause and equality and based upon the original Constitution. He is a great justice when it comes to these
This is an NBC News special report.
Good day, everyone. I'm David Gura. We're coming back on the air to bring you President Trump's first comments on the just announced retirement of Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy. Hallie Jackson is our chief White House correspondent. She joins me now. Hallie, the president talked about having a list of 25 individuals from which he will draw his next nominee. This is something we're familiar with. The president talked an awful lot when he was a candidate about whom he might nominate. Give us a sense of who is on that list, who the president might be considering.
Yeah, he sure did, David. And let me just sort of step back and paint the picture as to what has gone down now here at this White House, because the president now making his first public comments about the retirement of Justice Anthony Kennedy. Justice Kennedy was actually here in this building earlier this afternoon. He came in and out without the prying eyes of the media on him, managed to do so and speak with the president for roughly 30 minutes, according to President Trump, who talked with reporters about this in the Oval Office just moments ago. He is meeting with the Portuguese president right now, by the way. President Trump said that he spoke with Justice Kennedy about that retirement and about who should replace him. I'm going to let you listen in to what else the president had to say about this.
Statement of a man I also have great respect for, Justice Anthony. You know who I'm talking about. Justice Kennedy will be retiring, and he's a man that I've known for a long time and a man that I've respected for a long time. He's been a great justice of the Supreme Court. He is a man who is displaying great vision. He's displayed tremendous vision and tremendous heart, and he will be missed, but he will be retiring, and we will begin our search for a new justice of the United States Supreme Court that will begin immediately. And hopefully we're going to pick somebody who will be as outstanding. So I just want to thank Justice Kennedy for the years of tremendous service. He's a very spectacular man, really a spectacular man. And I know that he will be around hopefully for a long time to advise, and I believe he's going to be teaching and doing other things. So thank you to Justice Kennedy. Okay. Thank you.
Who will you pick to replace him, sir? Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Well, we have obviously numerous people. We have a list of 25 people that I actually had during my election. I had to 20, and as you know, I added 5 a little while ago. We have a very excellent list of great talented, highly educated, highly intelligent, hopefully tremendous people. I think the list is very outstanding. When I was running, I put down a list of 20 people because, not being a politician, I think people wanted to hear what some of my choices may be, and it was pretty effective. And I think you see the kind of quality that we're looking at when you look at that list. But I added 5 additional people to the list. So it will be somebody from that list. So we have now boiled it down to about 25 people.
And so when did you find out?
To the World Cup with President Putin to the final?
Yes, no, I will tell you, we fought very hard to get it here. I think they're doing a fantastic job with the World Cup right now. It's in Russia, and I will tell you that it's exciting. My son loves soccer, and he loves watching the World Cup, and they have really done a fantastic job with the World Cup. It's exciting, even if you're a non-soccer fan. I'm a soccer fan a little bit, but I don't have much time. But, well, I'm rooting for everybody to do well. But I think the venue has been fantastic. They really have shown something very special. I fought very hard to get it for the United States, Mexico, and Canada, as you probably have heard, and we were honored to be chosen. And this is a great gentleman and a great soccer fan, too. But we we were very honored to be chosen for the World Cup, so we look forward to that.
President, will you meet with President Putin, sir? And where?
Most likely. John Bolton is over there now. He's over in Russia right now. I just saw, watching media, that he's met with President Putin. I haven't gotten the full report yet, but it would look like we will probably be meeting sometime in the not-too-distant future. And I've said it from day one, getting along with Russia and with China and with everybody is a very good thing. It's good for the world, it's good for us, it's good for everybody. So we'll probably be meeting sometime around my trip to Europe.
Do you know where?
Hasn't been determined yet. Probably I will know within an hour.
And what about the injunction on immigration? Will you fight that? The California judge who says reunited families must be put together.
Well, we're going to see, but we believe that families should be together also. So there's not a lot to fight, but we believe families have to be together. But what we really do is we believe in very strong borders, no crime, and the Democrats believe in open borders and plenty of crime, because that's what you get with the open borders. I would like to introduce, however, the president of Portugal, and I'm sorry to bother you, but in our country, the selection of a justice of the United States Supreme Court is...
That's President Trump speaking just a few moments ago. He's there with the president of Portugal. The reporter who asked that last question is our Hallie Jackson, chief White House correspondent. I want to turn to her once again here, Hallie. We look back at the last nomination the president made, the result of that being Justice Neil Gorsuch. That was a unique process. President Obama had nominated Merrick Garland to that seat. He was unable to get a hearing in those last 8 months of President Obama's tenure as President of the United States, and then we saw this pivot to Neil Gorsuch. How different is this process going to be?
Well, it appears a little bit different, David. That is because we are just now hearing from Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell that, in fact, a vote will be held in the fall to confirm Justice Kennedy's successor. As you alluded to, Democrats for months had complained bitterly that Mitch McConnell had, in their view, held a seat unfairly open after Merrick Garland had been named by President Obama, then obviously the president at the time, because of the idea that the balance of power could change, and they didn't want to interfere with the election process, let the voters have their will, et cetera. That is, of course, after the 2016 election is when Justice Neil Gorsuch was picked by President Trump and then named to the court. This is incredibly significant, the retirement of Justice Kennedy and the idea that President Trump will step in and name somebody off of this list of 25 you heard him reference. He will reference it again in just a moment here, talking about that list, talking about names that Justice Kennedy brought up to him. Of course, these are many conservative-leaning judges currently in the system, or even, for example, members of Congress like Utah Senator Mike Lee, whose name was bandied about early on in the process, and it is on that list of potential contenders in addition to a couple of dozen other folks. I know that Pete Williams can talk a little bit about how Justice Kennedy was a critical swing vote in a lot of these 5-4 court cases that had come up recently, David.
Yeah, I want to turn now to our justice correspondent, Pete Williams. He's standing by at the Supreme Court. And Pete, let's stick with that list here for just a few minutes more. You've seen it. You know better than we about the ideology, the judicial background of each of those folks on that list. As you go through it, what comes across to you about the kind of justice the president's considering nominating when he has the opportunity now?
A solid conservative, somebody who has a judicial background. This process that the Trump White House is using tends to favor people who have been judges, who have a known record. The mantra has been no more suitors, references to David Souter, who came on here with a reputation as a conservative, but often joined the liberals here and was a great disappointment to the conservatives who asked President Bush to put him on the court. So they want people who have a record that is known, that they can vet and have a solid idea of what their positions are. This is the letter that Justice Kennedy hand-delivered. This is a copy of the letter that Justice Kennedy hand-delivered to the president today. And it's worth noting that it says he intends to step down from the court at the end of next month, July 31st, which will be right after he turns 82. Now, usually Supreme Court justices say they'll retire once their successor is nominated and confirmed. So this puts a little more pressure on the president and the Senate to get moving and get a confirmation done if there are going to be 9 justices when the Supreme Court opens its next term, as it does under law, the first Monday in October.
My colleague Pete Williams there outside the Supreme Court. So just after 17 months in office, President Trump now has his second opportunity to fill a Supreme Court vacancy and to dramatically reshape the Supreme Court for years to come. We'll be following this story throughout the day and have full details tonight on NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt. For now, I'm David Gura, NBC News in New York.
Saw him come in and out, did you? I'm shocked. Boy, they've done a great job. That's a shocker. That's a shocker. But yeah, we had he just left a little while ago, just prior to meeting the president.
Will you tell us who he recommended? Will you give us a
No, I won't do that. But he has, you know, there are certain names that are just outstanding. Names that you already know, to be honest with you. I mean, there are names that you know that are outstanding, highly respected, names that you would know, President. And we'll be looking at them. We'll be looking at some others, but they will come from the list of 25 people. Okay?
Mr. President, it's an election year. Would you give consideration to holding that spot open until the makeup of Congress is determined come November?
I haven't really thought about that. I think you want to go as quickly as possible. It's a process, but haven't really thought of that. But we had a big day yesterday, very big. We had a great decision today in terms of what was just released by the Supreme Court yesterday, obviously, with the travel ban was extremely big. And we had some tremendous elections. South Carolina, from my own standpoint, South Carolina, the governor, McMaster, it was a big win. And as you know, I was very much involved in New York with the Congressman, Donovan. So we're very happy. This was a good few days, and now I get to cap it off by meeting with the president of Portugal. And Portugal's been actually very important to our nation. And you're right, we have about 1.5 million people from Portugal here. So that's very important.
Do you have a message to House Republicans to pass the trade?
No, I want them to do what they wanted. You know, the problem we have, and I told them this morning, I said, hey, pass it if you can. But I also want them to do what they want. We have a big immigration bill like everybody does, like you're talking, and everybody talks about immigration now, I think, more than ever before. I told them a few hours ago, I said, look, pass something or come back with something that would be a derivation, but get something you want. The problem we have is we need Democratic votes in the Senate, and that's why I don't get overly excited with the House bill right now, because it's not going to pass in the Senate. You're not going to get the Democrats to vote for anything. If we gave them 100% of what they wanted and then doubled it, they still wouldn't pass it because they think it's a good election point. I think it's good for us, because I think strong borders, I don't even know how you feel about that, but I think strong borders and no crime that's us. And I think that's going to be a great election point for us. So I told them 2 hours ago, I said, you know, do what you want. And ultimately, we'll come to something, and perhaps it'll be after the election, maybe it'll be before. But as of this moment, Democrats are not going to vote for anything because they really are resisting or obstructing. Okay? Thank you very much. Well, I think we'll be talking about Syria. I think we'll be talking about Ukraine. I think we'll be talking about many other subjects, and we'll see what happens. So you never know. You never know about meetings, what happens, right? But I think a lot of good things can come with meetings with people. We had great meetings with President Xi of China. We have, every place I've been, we have had great meetings. So maybe something positive will come out of it.
What about the progressive challenger that beat Joe Crowley, that young woman from New York? Are you worried about it?
Well, that was a shocker. Losing, for Crowley to lose that election, that was a shocker. I was surprised. Everybody was surprised. We had somebody that's been in there for many years, Mr. President, and I think he probably took it for granted. And I can't say that I'm disappointed because I was never a big fan. But he lost his election. Probably shouldn't have lost his election. Maybe you get a little complacent. You know, that does happen. You get complacent. And he lost. That's a big loss. I tell you what, that was a shocking loss. But it is what it is. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you. the steel industry is absolutely doing great. The tariffs have been incredible, and the steel industry is doing great, and our country is doing great. You're seeing the results. The numbers coming out from the companies are far beyond what anybody ever thought possible. We're doing really good. But we have to have fair trade deals, and we're working on really fair trade deals. We're working with your representatives on fair trade deals. So
I heard you're going to receive President Juncker. That's good news.
Yes.
That's good news.
Thank you, everybody. They're working. It's going to be very good. It's going to be.
As far as when you might meet with after NATO?
Probably after.
Right after NATO.
Probably after.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much. Could be, or be, it'll be announced very soon. Sit down, please.
Let's go. Let's keep going.
Thank you.
Sir, let's go.
Very excited because of the justice.
Okay, that is footage. We are just receiving a very slight delay there. President Trump in the Oval Office. That's the president of Portugal with him, an informal session with reporters. The news, of course, breaking just before he began speaking there. Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy, he is stepping down. He is retiring from the court, opens up a seat that the president can now make a nomination for, and the Republican Senate could then consider. The president was asked there, you might have heard by our Hallie Jackson, if there'd be any consideration with the fact that we are very close to a midterm election. Would that dissuade him from making a nomination now and waiting? He said he hadn't thought about it, but he was inclined to move quickly. Back with me, Hardball's Chris Matthews, NBC's Kristen Welker joining us, along with presidential historian John Meacham. And Kristen Welker, let me start with you. Again, the president answering Hallie Jackson there saying, hey, I hadn't thought about the timing. My sense, though, is this is a White House, like the entire political world, that has been waiting on this word from Anthony Kennedy for a long time and probably has a pretty clear idea what it would like to do here.
I would think so, Steve. And you heard him talk about the fact that he does have a list of about 25 people. That a likely reference to that list that he put out during the campaign. 25 people. We have it right here. A number of different judges all across the country. I'll just give you a couple of names. Amy Coney Barrett of Indiana, the U.S. Court of Appeals from the 7th Circuit. Keith Blackwell of Georgia, Supreme Court of Georgia. Raymond Kethledge of Michigan, U.S. Court of Appeals for the 6th Circuit. So this is a group, 25 names, men and women. This list, though, was put together by the Heritage Foundation as well as the Federalist Society, two conservative groups. So it underscores the fact that the president, not surprisingly, is going to pick someone who is conservative, who shares his values on a range of different issues. And of course, Steve, this could have big implications for a number of very fierce fights that this country is engaged in, everything from abortion rights to religious liberties, to a range of other national security issues. So this is significant, and it's a chance for President Trump to really put a big stamp on the Supreme Court, what could shape up to be, Steve, one of the most significant pieces of his legacy. This will be two Supreme Court justices that he will get to pick.
Yeah, and John Meacham, we've been talking this hour about the political fight, a massive political fight that may be shaping up here. And the backdrop, the big picture backdrop for this is Kennedy is on the court because Robert Bork couldn't get on the court 30 years ago. Democrats wouldn't confirm him. We had a big fight back then. Now the fight to replace him could be even bigger. And in between, in those 30 years, the way these Supreme Court nominations play out, the way the court is viewed in our politics, it is changed, it is broken down. This system over a generation has been altered very significantly.
It has been, and Justice Kennedy's term was born out of controversy. The Bork nomination failed, not least because Ted Kennedy took to the floor on the day of its announcement and gave a very powerful, hyper-partisan speech about it. If you ask Republicans, when did the partisan wars of the current era begin, they point to what Kennedy did to Bork, and it created a verb. To be borked was to be taken on ideological grounds. This is President Reagan's last appointment. Justice Kennedy served, I think, almost twice as long as Earl Warren did. That means we now have one justice from Bush 41, two from Clinton, I think the rest from Bush 43 and Obama. And Justice Kennedy, like Justice O'Connor before him, was a hugely important swing vote, whether the issue was Bush v. Gore or the marriage equality decision, which was 3 years ago today, I think. And it just reminds us, as if we needed another thing to remember, that elections matter enormously.
And Chris Matthews, listening to the president there talk about this, again, this will be his second pick for the Supreme Court, potentially in 2 years in office. He will have had 2 justices nominated and confirmed for this. What was your reaction?
Well, I don't think we're looking at the fresher history here of this 5-4 court. Of course, as John Meacham just mentioned, they were the ones who threw the election, took it out of the hands of the Supreme Court down in Florida and gave it to George W. Bush. And then, of course, they gave the gun people what they wanted in the Heller decision. Then they gave the money people the decision they wanted in the United Citizens United. And then, of course, just yesterday, they gave the anti-immigrant people what this Supreme Court, this 5-4 court, has been pro-Republican, pro-gun, pro-money, and against immigration, anti-immigrant, if you will. And I think the Democrats, as I said a few moments ago, have to fight this tooth and nail. They have to use every process opportunity they have to stop this until next year when we have a new Senate. We don't know whether next year's Senate will be Republican or Democratic dominated. But to give this to the Republicans when they control this Senate, basically 51 or 50 to 49, really, with John McCain perhaps not voting again, to give them this last chance to pack the court 5-4 again, hard conservative. I say this, the base will attack the leadership for this if they allow it to happen, and they should, because this is time for vengeance for what happened 2 years ago. And if they don't wreak the vengeance now, with 4.5 months to go before the election, they will not look very strong to their base, and I think they'll be under attack, and you'll see more Joe Crowleys go down.
Chris Matthews, I know we have to let you go, but thank you for being with us this hour. Kristen Welker, let me bring you back in on that point, though. Chris Matthews is calling on Democrats to fight this and not let this happen. I look at this, I don't see a tool that Democrats, if that is their inclination, would have, because last year they tried to filibuster the nomination of Neil Gorsuch, and Republicans said, okay, we're going to use that so-called nuclear option. No more filibuster. We just need a simple majority. If Republicans say they want to confirm Trump's choice here, maybe I'm wrong. Is there a tool here Democrats could have?
Not that I'm aware of, and I think you have hit the significant point here, which is that they passed Neil Gorsuch through a simple majority, and so the expectation is that they will apply the exact same calculus if and when the president makes a new pick for the Supreme Court. And of course, Republicans are poised to fight just as hard on this point. You saw Leader McConnell yesterday tweeting out those photos of him with Neil Gorsuch after he had been approved, after his nomination had been approved, essentially saying to Democrats, look, I did this. I was the one who ultimately paved the way for this confirmation to happen. Of course, Democrats still fuming after Merrick Garland's nomination was blocked. And so they did everything they could within their power to try to stop it. They just didn't have the votes to do that. So I don't know why it would be different this time around, Steve.
John?
Just very quickly, if you want to know why Donald Trump won the establishment Republican vote in key states, it's because of tax cuts and days like this.
Supreme Court nominations. It's any Republican president. You could hear that in 2016. The activists would say, you may not like Trump, but he would have the power to do that. And here it is, potentially now, the second Supreme Court nomination for Donald Trump, potentially the second confirmation of a justice for him if this plays out that way over the next few months. Big breaking news. We are not going to be going away from this. I will be stepping away this hour. That'll do it for me here. In for Katie Tur, I'm Steve Kornacki, but Ali Velshi is going to pick things right up. Ali, right over to you.
Yeah, don't go too far. We're going to need your brains on this one, Steve. Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Ali Velshi. Big news from the United States Supreme Court. Justice Anthony Kennedy, known as the crucial swing vote, will retire on July 31st. To give you an idea of how big this is, when attorneys argue their cases before the Supreme Court, we're told they often tailor their arguments specifically toward Kennedy, and that judges in lower courts sometimes write their rulings with the intention of swaying Kennedy in case their rulings reach the Supreme Court. His departure gives President Trump, as you've heard, the opportunity to nominate another Supreme Court justice, which could mean 5 conservative justices for liberals. And that puts quite a few major decisions back in play. This is a game changer. President Trump welcomed the news.
We will begin our search for a new justice of the United States Supreme Court. That will begin immediately. And hopefully we're going to pick somebody who will be as outstanding. So I just want to thank Justice Kennedy for the years of tremendous service he's a very spectacular man, really a spectacular man. And I know that he will be around, hopefully, for a long time to advise. And
all right, our special coverage begins with NBC's Pete Williams outside the United States Supreme Court and Chris Matthews, host of Hardball here on MSNBC. Pete, let's start with you. Tell us what happened. It was one of these things we've been discussing for the last few days that people have been anticipating, but they weren't sure it was going to happen. And he was up against a deadline as to whether or not he was going to retire or wait until the next session.
Well, actually, I'm not sure there is a deadline. The Supreme Court justices tend to do whatever they want. The tradition has been that most of them announce their retirement before the last day. The last couple have been in March or April. Justice Kennedy, I guess, believes in precedent because the man he replaced on the Supreme Court also announced his intention to retire on the last day of the term. So perhaps that's why he chose today to write this letter and take this letter to the White House and hand deliver it to the president, saying he intends to step down on July 31st. That means that the president's going to have to get a nominee up to the Senate, and they'll have to get that nominee confirmed by the first Monday in October if we're to have 9 justices when the court convenes. This is going to be the biggest change on the U.S. Supreme Court in at least half a century, because we go from a court that had 4 solid conservatives and 4 liberals with Justice Kennedy in the middle, and now we're going to have a solid 5 conservative members. But Ali, you said that lawyers sometimes pitch their arguments to Justice Kennedy. Tom Goldstein has argued 41 cases before the Supreme Court. Is that true?
That's pretty true, particularly on an ideological question, the kinds of questions that your viewers really care about, whether it's abortion, affirmative action, gun rights, gay rights, all of those sorts of things. He was the decider. You could not win a case without Justice Kennedy.
Put it another way, of all the justices who could have retired today, is this the most significant? Or I suppose it would also be a big deal if Justice Ginsburg retired, but is this a big deal?
This is the biggest deal of a voluntary, plausible retirement, because if any of the other conservatives were to retire, you'd get somebody kind of just like them.
Right.
But there are questions on which Justice Kennedy has been holding back the movement of law in the United States to the right. Things like gun rights, things like affirmative action, things like voting rights. He's a conservative for sure, but you can get somebody that's a lot more conservative.
So now we face this prospect of a Supreme Court without Anthony Kennedy, who has been the deciding vote really for the last 12 years, ever since Sandra Day O'Connor stepped down. She was often described as the swing vote, but Justice Kennedy stepped into that position, and as you heard Tom say, he was, for all intents and purposes, the decider. Some legal scholars even said, though, this Chief Justice is John Roberts. It's really the Kennedy court and not the Roberts court, because it's Justice Kennedy who was also often that 5th vote. If you think about it, 4 liberals, 4 conservatives, often tied, like today, for example, on the future of public sector unions. Right. The court was divided 4-4. Justice Gorsuch got on the court with Justice Kennedy. You had a conservative majority. So it's going to be a conservative court for years and years to come. It's going to be a huge, huge change in the lineup of the court. And of course, the other thing to remember is we've got at least 2 more years of President Trump, a little over 2 more years, as he continues to nominate at a really record pace judges on the federal courts of appeal and the U.S. district courts. So the Trump presidency, not just the Supreme Court, but the lower courts as well, is going to vastly reshape America's courts. It's the power of the presidency, and it helps when you have the Senate in your party.
No kidding. All right, Pete, thank you for your great coverage of that. Stay close. We're going to have a lot of this over the course of the hour. Chris Matthews, let's pull this back to 20,000 feet and explain why this is